I look at three major forces that are happening now, haven't happened in our lifetimes, but have happened many times in history. And those three major forces are the creation of a lot of debt and the printing of a lot of money to buy that debt, particularly because the government is running large deficits, and so they don't have enough money, so that government has to print that money. So that creation of all of that debt and its financial implications and its economic implications is one force. The second force is the internal conflict. The amount of conflict that's internally, largely due to the largest wealth gaps that we've had since the 30s. That produces populism of the left and the right, particularly when there are financial difficulties. The third force is the rising power, the challenging the existing power, largely in the form of China and to some extent Russia. Let's call it the great power conflict, because in 1945, you have a war, and after a war, you have winners, and the winners determine the rules of the game. And then there's this evolution of others becoming more competitive, and then you have a conflict again for who's in control. So we have that dynamic taking place. So those three influences. I also learned in studying history that there were two other influences that were very big, and you could see them. The first was acts of nature, such as droughts, floods, and pandemics, the changes over time in the evolution over time of people's learning and the technologies they make. So I'd say there are the really five big influences that drive everything, and they are the money and debt, economic influence, the internal conflict, the external conflict, the nature influence, and let's call it the technology influence. One man's debts are another man's assets. Okay, so what happened? The government had to sell a lot of debt. When it sold a lot of debt, there were a lot of entities that bought a lot of bonds, government bonds, and money was very easy, which meant that short-term interest rates were very low, and money was actually being given away, because they had interest-only loans and interest rates were less than 1%, and you didn't have to pay back principal, so you could go get money. And so that created a lot of debt, and it created a lot of buying of government bonds. So what happened to Silicon Valley Bank is what happened to many, many entities all around the world, not just banks. And then people realize it's not safe because I'm losing money to inflation. So now you have the central bank wanting to rectify that imbalance by real interest rates were minus 1.7%. If I look at inflation index bonds as an indicator, I'm losing percentage points to inflation by holding that bond. And people realize that, well, you don't want to do that. And then the other side of it was you want to borrow and buy stuff. Money's free. So companies borrow and buy stuff, and individuals borrow and buy houses, interest-only loans on the houses. I mean, okay, I can buy a house, but that creates the imbalance where it's terrible to be a lender and a creditor, and it's good to be a borrower and do that. So that imbalance takes place. It produces inflation. So I think we know those things, and that's happening at the same time as we have an internal conflict taking place, such as the presidential election, who are at each other's throats about this. And that's happening at the same time as we have the situation, most importantly, China and Russia, in terms of the issues, in terms of their things to fight over. We know, I think, pretty much that we're going to have financial problems and economic problems at the same time as we have this internal fighting and this external risky situation. When we think about safety, we have to think about that as purchasing power, because a lot of people think if I put my money into a treasury bill, I get safety. Look at whether that's giving you a return that's compensating for inflation. And maybe we're all wrong. Maybe there's nothing to worry about. Okay, so how do I deal with that? What this guy Dalio is saying is very crazy, and who knows whether he's right or wrong, and he's been wrong in the past, and who knows if it's right. And that's exactly what you said is the way pretty much I look at it, what you said. And if I was to paint the world, I painted the world the way I did. Okay. And I have those questions. And then beyond that, I say, you as an individual should think about the total safety, including maybe that terrible scenario doesn't happen. Okay. That's what I'd like you to do. And if you do that, you will come to a better balanced position. I want you to get balance. I want you to have enough savings, to have security. But to be financially strong requires you to not spend more than you earn. That means you either have to cut your spending or raise your earnings. That ain't easy. Infrastructure programs, poverty transfers, defense spending. What are we going to cut? Governments have the same basic economics as people, except for the fact that they can take money from one person and give it to another, and they can print money. You have that gap. You can eliminate the gap by taking money from some and eliminating another and not spending much. That most governments now don't think, how much money do I have to spend, and then how do I prioritize that? I need to spend on this, I need to spend on that, and I need to spend on that, and they spend on it, and then they either produce a deficit, and then you either have to pay it back with hard money or printed money, and that's situation. So when you say, what could we do? Well, you've got to get financially strong in a politically fragmented environment in which everybody wants more, and you have to, be a higher percentage of world trade so that everybody wants to use your currency and not threaten the holders of that bonds with freezing their assets. Good parental guidance. Okay, you're raised well, you're educated well. You can go to a public school that educates you well and you have good guidance, so you're well raised in a healthy environment. And not only do you learn skills and all that, but you learn how to behave well with each other. So you learn civility. So you come out capable and civil to a land of opportunity in which you can work and have a good environment. And really, that's all you need. Education in a lot of public education is deteriorating. It's a real problem.